The corrugated metal of the hangar radiated heat like an oven even as the sun began its descent toward the Somali horizon. Lieutenant Emma Hayes stepped off the C-130's ramp onto cracked tarmac, her trauma ruck pulling at her shoulders with familiar weight. The air tasted of dust and jet fuel, a combination that brought back memories she kept carefully filed away. Around her, a Navy SEAL platoon moved with that particular brand of controlled chaos that came before night operations. Weapons checks, radio tests, the quiet intensity of men preparing to step into violence. She was quiet as she made her way toward the makeshift casualty collection point, her boots crunching on gravel. The deployment orders had been sudden. Expeditionary Medical Detachment out of Djibouti, temporary augmentation for a high-value target operation. She'd done this before, just not with this particular group of warriors who moved through the heat like they owned it. "Hey, check it out." A voice carried across the hangar floor, loud enough to turn heads. A SEAL petty officer with the build of a linebacker and the swagger to match stood near a stack of ammo crates, grinning at his teammates. "They sent us a nurse. I thought we asked for a real medic." A few chuckles rippled through the group. Emma kept her expression neutral, continuing to inventory her medical supplies. She'd heard variations of this her entire career. The officer in charge, a lieutenant commander with sun-weathered skin and tired eyes, glanced her way with something that might have been apologetic. "Lieutenant Hayes will be stationed at the CCP. Just stay put, treat if needed, and don't get in the way. We've got our organic medic with the assault element." Emma nodded once, professional. "Understood, sir. I'd like to review the casualty flow plan and discuss staging for multiple." "We've got it covered." Another SEAL interrupted, not unkindly, but with the dismissive certainty of someone who'd already made up his mind about her capabilities. "It's a routine snatch operation. We'll be in and out before you finish setting up your Band-Aids." The loud petty officer, she'd heard someone call him Kowalski, was still going. "Just stay at the hospital next time, ma'am. Let the real trigger pullers handle the dangerous stuff while you push IVs and take temperatures." More laughter. Emma felt heat that had nothing to do with the Somali sun crawl up her neck, but she kept her hands steady as she laid out tourniquets in precise rows. The combat medical badge, sewn inside her ruck's inner pocket, stayed hidden. The thin bracelet on her wrist with Arabic script that read steadfast caught the light for just a moment before she adjusted her sleeve. She thought about Baghdad in 2006, about dust and blood, and the particular sound an MRAP makes when it hits an IED. She thought about being 22 years old and doing CPR in the back of a moving vehicle while someone screamed grid coordinates over the radio and artillery walked closer with each passing second. She thought about the surgeon at the trauma bay in Sadr City who'd looked at her across a table covered in too much blood and said, "Time of death, 2237. Good work, Hayes. We did everything we could." But these SEALs didn't know any of that. They saw scrubs and a nursing commission, not the years before when she'd worn different patches and learned to keep her hand from shaking until after the casualties were stable. The world had decided she was a hospital type now, a staff officer who belonged in air-conditioned wards, not in the dust and chaos where medicine became a combat sport. So she said nothing. She just went back to building her trauma bay in silence, mapping out in her mind how casualties would flow from the landing zone to her treatment area, identifying choke points and likely ambush routes with the automatic threat assessment of someone who'd planned for these scenarios before. No one was asking for her analysis, but she couldn't turn off that part of her brain, the part that had been forged in another war. Over the next 24 hours, the pattern repeated and intensified. During a weapons check, Emma reached to move an M for that someone had carelessly left across her medical supplies. Her hands moved on autopilot, pressed the magazine release, locked the bolt back, visually and physically checked the chamber, safe the weapon, place it carefully aside. The muscle memory was so ingrained she barely registered doing it. "Whoa there, ma'am," a young SEAL said, genuine alarm in his voice. "Careful with that. That end goes bang." The guys around him laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all day. Emma set the rifle down gently and went back to organizing 4 bags, saying nothing. Her jaw hurt from clenching. When the OIC finally called for a medical brief, Emma tried to lay out a proper casualty plan. I'd recommend a tiered approach. Immediate trauma interventions inside the hangar where we have better light and protection from small arms. Walking wounded staged outside near the aircraft. Clear radio protocols for 9-line medevacs with pre-designated landing zones. And that seems like a lot of hospital drama for a routine op. One of the team leaders interrupted, his attention already back on his night vision setup. We've got one medic with the assault element. You're at the CCP if something goes sideways. Keep it simple. Kowalski leaned back against the crate, arms crossed. Yeah, we're not running a field hospital here. Just be ready with the tissues and ice packs, ma'am. The phrase, just a nurse, started circulating like currency. She heard it at the makeshift chow area, during equipment checks, in the casual dismissals that came whenever she offered input. Each repetition landed like a small cut, the kind that didn't bleed much but accumulated. A training mishap gave them more ammunition. During rehearsals, someone came down wrong on a jump and twisted an ankle. Emma evaluated it quickly. Second-degree sprain, no fracture, functional instability. She wrapped it efficiently, recommended ice and elevation. Clear the operator as fit with limitations. See, Kowalski announced to anyone listening. That's nurse stuff right there. Ice packs and ankle tape. Exactly what I said. Emma packed up her A-bag without comment. But one of the senior chiefs, a grizzled operator with gray threading through his beard, had been watching. His eyes caught on the faded combat medical badge patch barely visible inside her ruck when she opened it. He noticed the way she positioned herself against the hangar wall when a nearby controlled detonation sent a boom across the airfield. Not flinching, exactly, but moving to cover with the automatic response of someone who'd learned that lesson the hard way. He noticed the bracelet with Arabic script, the calluses on her hands that didn't come from hospital work. He didn't say anything. Not yet, but his expression shifted slightly, became more thoughtful. That night, Emma reviewed maps alone while the SEALs ran through final brief. She studied the village layout, the approach routes, the terrain between the target and the airstrip. Her finger traced potential evacuation paths, places where an enemy could set up hasty ambush positions, choke points where a medical emergency would turn critical. She'd been on the wrong side of poor planning too many times to ignore the tactical picture, even when no one asked for her assessment. Her satellite phone buzzed. The senior enlisted medic from her detachment back at the main facility in Djibouti, checking in one last time. You get out there, Hayes? Yeah, Chief. All set. A pause. Then his voice dropped lower, more serious. Keep your head down this time, all right? I remember the last after-action report I read with your name on it. That was a different war, different time. Different uniform, too, she said quietly. Still the same Emma Hayes who can't help running toward the fire. Just be smart. She promised she would be, ended the call, and went back to studying the maps. The SEALs' laughter carried across the hangar, easy and confident. They had no idea what was coming. Neither did she, really. But she learned a long time ago that preparation was the difference between saving lives and counting bodies. Night fell over the coast like curtain. The helicopter's rotors beat the air into submission as the SEAL team lifted off toward the village, their silhouettes disappearing against the stars. Emma stood at her casualty collection point with 2 security personnel, a young Marine corporal who looked barely old enough to shave and a Navy master at arms who seemed competent enough, and a Somali interpreter named Ahmed who'd worked with American forces for years. The radio crackled with initial contact reports. Calm voices, professional brevity. Infill complete. Moving to objective. Then, minutes later, breach, breach, breach. The methodical progression of a mission going according to plan. Emma laid out supplies one more time, rehearsing sequences in her mind. Massive hemorrhage, airway, breathing, circulation. Blood products ready. Chest seals accessible. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from countless casualties, real and simulated. Then the tone on the radio shifted. Contact, contact. Multiple fighters, northeast of target building. The calm professionalism fractured into urgent calls. Unexpected resistance, heavier than intelligence had suggested. Someone called out a possible mortar team setting up on the village perimeter. Hawk 2, wave off. Wave off. Taking effective fire at the LZ. The helicopter that was supposed to provide immediate extraction banked away from tracer fire, leaving the team on the ground longer than planned. Emma's heart rate climbed, but her hands stayed steady. This was the part where plans met reality and showed which one was stronger. The first casualties arrived 15 minutes ahead of schedule. A Somali partner 4 soldier, carried by 2 of his teammates, blood soaking through his pants from a devastating leg wound. Then a SEAL, moving under his own power but with shrapnel peppered across his shoulder and neck, blood running dark against his kit. Set him down here, Emma ordered, her voice cutting through the confusion with authority she hadn't used since arriving. You, Corporal, pressure on that leg wound. Direct pressure now. Master at Arms, I need that stretcher moved to the north side. Better cover from indirect fire. She worked fast, triaging with the brutal efficiency of someone who'd done this when it mattered. Tourniquet high and tight on the Somali soldier's leg, her hands slick with blood. Quick assessment of the SEAL's wounds. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening. Stable enough for delayed treatment. In the distance, the crackle of gunfire intensified. No longer the sporadic sound of a firefight in the village, but something closer. Tracer rounds arced through the darkness toward the airstrip itself. Ma'am, we got movement. The corporal's voice climbed an octave. Through his night vision scope, he'd spotted vehicles, pickup trucks, fighters spreading out in a tactical formation. The militants weren't just defending the village. They were pushing toward the airfield, trying to cut off the American exfiltration route. A round snapped past the hangar entrance, impossibly close. The master-at-arms opened fire, but his discipline broke. He was spraying rounds without aimed shots, burning through a magazine in seconds. Then the corporal went down, a stray round catching him in the leg. He dropped with a scream, his weapon clattering across the concrete. The master-at-arms looked at Emma with wide eyes, the kind of panic that preceded complete mission failure. Ahmed, the interpreter, had already taken cover, smart enough to recognize when a situation was deteriorating beyond recovery. Emma looked at the bleeding casualties, looked at the shadows moving closer to the airstrip perimeter, looked at the corporal's M4 lying on the ground, its barrel still radiating heat. She thought about Baghdad, about being the only medic in a building when insurgents tried to overrun a checkpoint, about the moment she'd realized no one was coming to save them, that she had to be both doc and defender, that there was no choosing between healing and fighting when the only alternative was everyone dying. Her hands finished clamping an artery on the Somali soldier, secured the tourniquet with practice speed. Then she picked up the rifle. Magazine check, 23 rounds. Bolt check, 1 in the chamber. Safety off. The weapon settled into her shoulder like an old friend. CCP actual to any station, she said into the radio, her voice controlled and firm. We are taking direct fire at the airstrip. Perimeter compromised. I need guidance on rules of engagement and immediate air support. There was a beat of stunned silence on the net. Then the senior chief's voice, strain evident but controlled. CCP actual, this is ground lead. Say again your last. Ground lead, CCP. We have enemy fighters advancing on the airfield from multiple angles. I have 3 casualties, 1 security element Kia, 1 wounded. I am assuming defensive posture to protect casualties and maintain exfil site. Request immediate close air support and your ETA to this position. Another pause. She could almost hear the wheels turning, the SEALs trying to reconcile the calm, professional voice with the just a nurse they dismissed. CCP, understood. Gunship inbound your position, 2 mics. We are fighting back to you now. Keep that LZ clear. Emma moved to a low rooftop accessible from inside the hangar, a position that gave her better sight lines and a defensible angle. She positioned the master-at-arms on a narrower sector, talked him down from his panic with the same voice she used to calm patients before surgery. Ahmed she kept with the wounded, performing basic first aid under her shouted instructions. Through her sights, Emma tracked the enemy movement. They were trying to flank along a berm that ran parallel to the runway, a textbook approach that would put them in perfect position to ambush the SEALs when they returned. She controlled her breathing, settled into a shooting position that her body remembered from ranges in Iraq, and began placing shots. Semi-auto. Breathe. Squeeze. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. A fighter dropped. Another shot. Another fighter scrambled for cover. She wasn't spraying rounds like the panicked master at arms. Every shot was deliberate, aimed, the product of training that had been refreshed by necessity and refined by survival. The enemy advance stalled, confused by effective fire coming from a position they hadn't expected to be defended. On the radio, she heard the senior chief's heavy breathing as the SEAL team fought their way back toward the airstrip. Then his voice, urgent. CCP, this is ground lead. I have one urgent surgical, massive blood loss, need immediate intervention upon arrival. Emma's voice came back instantly, switching from trigger puller to trauma nurse without missing a beat. Ground lead, CCP copies urgent surgical. I am combat effective and ready to receive. Talk me through his status while en route. As she listened to the 9-line report, her eyes never left the approaching enemy. She called out target descriptions to the circling gunship that had just arrived on station, her language textbook perfect, friendly position marked by IR strobe, enemy concentration 200 meters northeast, danger close authorization given, cleared hot. The night lit up with the gunship's cannons. The technical trucks disintegrated in blooms of flame. The fighters who'd been advancing on the airstrip broke and ran, their assault collapsing under coordinated fires. Emma kept shooting until the last angle was clear, then scrambled back down to her casualties. The wounded SEAL from earlier was going into shock, his blood pressure dropping. She was already reaching for 4 bags, barking orders to Ahmed about applying pressure, her hands transitioning from weapon to medical instruments as naturally as breathing. When the SEAL team finally reached the airstrip, carrying their high-value detainee and dragging their most seriously wounded operator on an improvised litter, they found a scene that rewrote their assumptions. Multiple hostile bodies near the berm. A burned-out technical smoking in the distance. Casualties organized by severity, each with proper documentation of interventions. And Lieutenant Emma Hayes, kneeling in a pool of blood and dust, the corporal's rifle slung across her back, calling for more 4 bags while her hands compressed a sucking chest wound with the kind of pressure that came from knowing exactly how much force a human ribcage could take. Kowalski, the loud, petty officer who'd led the mockery, stared at the scene, at the weapon across her shoulders, at the combat medical badge patch now visible on her bloodstained gear, at the way she moved between casualties with absolute confidence, her hands working 2 trauma interventions simultaneously while directing Ahmed through a third. His expression transformed from cocky certainty to something like shock, maybe shame. The senior chief knelt beside her, helping with the urgent surgical case, a SEAL with a femoral artery injury that would have killed him in minutes without intervention. As they worked together in synchronized efficiency, he asked quietly, Baghdad, 2006. Emma didn't look up from the artery she was clamping. 4th Infantry. Sadr City. He nodded slowly, recognition in his eyes. I knew guys who came through that aid station. They said the medics, there were absolute savages. Save people who had no business surviving. We did what needed doing, she said simply, moving to the next casualty. The debrief happened at dawn, everyone exhausted and running on adrenaline fumes. The mission was technically successful. High-value target captured, friendly casualties all stable and evacuated to higher care. But the real story was quieter, more personal. Kowalski couldn't meet Emma's eyes. When he tried to apologize, she just shook her head. Forget it. We're good. But they both knew something had shifted. The loud certainty was gone, replaced by the humility that came from being catastrophically wrong about someone. Days later, the tempo returned to something resembling normal. The SEALs still gave each other endless grief, still moved with that particular swagger that came from being very good at very dangerous work. But now when they did gear checks, they included Emma. Her call sign, Steady, was on the radio plan, on the operations board, spoken with the same casual respect they gave each other. The petty officer who'd made the jokes brought her coffee one morning without comment, to set it down beside her while she reviewed lab work. That small gesture, that quiet acknowledgement, meant more than any formal apology could have. Emma didn't tell the story. She didn't need to. The gunship crew's mission log told it. The classified after-action report told it. The grateful looks from the wounded SEALs told it. She went back to her normal work, checking vitals, reviewing supply requests, arguing with logistics about tourniquet allocations, seemingly content with the quiet knowledge that she'd done what she'd been trained to do. Because that was the thing about true professionals, the real warriors who kept the wheels turning and the bleeding stopped. They rarely needed to announce their capabilities. They were too busy actually using them, too focused on the mission to worry about the recognition. The ones you should never underestimate were always the ones too busy doing the job to brag about having done it before. Out there in the heat and dust and chaos, the only thing that mattered was competence when everything went wrong. Emma Hayes had proven hers in blood and gunpowder, in steady hands and controlled breathing, in the quiet strength of someone who'd been tested before and knew exactly what she was capable of. The SEALs wouldn't make the mistake of underestimating just a nurse again. And somewhere in the archives, in mission reports and classified briefings, another story joined the collection of quiet heroism that kept warriors alive and brought them home. Just another day in the life of someone the world had tried to put in a box, until reality demanded she break out of it and save lives.